On a breezy Saturday evening in Fairfield, Connecticut, families gathered at a small park to enjoy the fading sun. Kids played soccer, and teens lounged on benches, earbuds in, scrolling through their phones. Among them was 16-year-old Ethan Sullivan, seated beneath a tall oak tree, casually flipping through a book. His younger brother, Liam, was finishing soccer practice, and Ethan had promised their mom he'd wait to walk him home. Ethan looked out of place in a fitted black suit with a crisp white shirt and polished shoes. He looked comfortable, though, lost in the world of his book when the distant rumble of motorcycles cut through the peaceful evening. At first, it seemed like just another group of bikers passing through, engines louder than necessary. But tonight was different. The bikers rolled in, parking near the soccer field. 5 of them, clad in leather jackets and dark jeans, stepped off their bikes, standing like sentinels, their serious expressions contrasting sharply with the joyful families around them. Ethan noticed them immediately. Their eyes locked onto him, and a creeping unease settled in his stomach. He forced himself to focus back on his book, but the calmness didn't last. A burly man with a shaved head nudged his friends and started striding toward Ethan. "What are you doing here, kid?" The man's voice was gruff, heavy with intimidation. Ethan hesitated. "Waiting for my brother," he replied, keeping his tone polite. The man smirked, glancing around. "Doesn't look like your kind of place." Ethan felt the heat rise in his cheeks but maintained his composure. "It's a public park," he countered smoothly. The man stepped closer, his friends forming a semicircle behind him. "Got a smart mouth," he sneered. Ethan took a brief scan of the park, hoping someone would notice the tension under the oak tree. But no one seemed to care. Their attention remained focused on the soccer game. Years of karate training had taught Ethan the importance of observation and restraint. He didn't want to escalate things, but he recognized the threat. "I don't want any trouble," he said, trying to keep things calm. The burly man leaned down, invading Ethan's personal space. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble?" he taunted. Ethan didn't flinch. He adjusted his stance to something relaxed, eyes still locked on the man in front of him, calculating how much time until Liam finished and could help. That's when Liam's voice rang out from behind. "Leave him alone." Ethan turned slightly to see his 9-year-old brother standing a few yards away, sweat dripping from his forehead. "Jordan, stay back," Ethan called, his voice firm. The bikers turned their attention to Liam, grinning like predators spotting an easier target. "Is this your brother?" one of them asked, pointing at Liam. "Maybe we should teach you both a lesson." Ethan's heart raced, pulse quickening, but he stood tall, stepping toward the bikers with quiet resolve. He planted his feet in the stance he'd practiced so many times in the dojo. "Don't touch him," he said, his voice calm but steady. The burly man laughed, mocking him. "Look at this kid. Thinks he's tough." Ethan didn't back down. He scanned the crowd, looking for help, but no one was coming. He didn't need anyone to intervene. This was his fight. The bikers rushed forward. The first swung wildly, but Ethan ducked, his movements smooth and practiced. He delivered a sharp kick to the biker's knee, sending him to the ground with a cry. The second biker hesitated just long enough for Ethan to pivot, delivering a spinning kick to his side, knocking the wind out of him. The burly leader lunged, fists swinging, but Ethan dodged each blow with ease, his body light, agile, controlled. The crowd began to gather, parents, kids, even soccer players, watching as the scene unfolded. Someone had pulled out a phone, recording the event. The leader charged again, grabbing for Ethan's suit jacket. Ethan twisted, slipping out of his grip. He struck the man's solar plexus, sending him stumbling back, gasping for air. "Enough," Ethan said, his voice loud enough to carry through the park. "I don't want to hurt you. Walk away." For a moment, it seemed like the leader considered retreat. He glared at Ethan, then gestured at his comrades. With curses, the bikers limped back to their motorcycles and revved their engines. Before they could leave, the leader turned back, pointing at Ethan. "This ain't over, kid," he spat. As the sound of the motorcycles faded, Ethan stood, steadying his breath, adrenaline still surging through him. The crowd began to clap, murmurs of admiration rippling through them. Liam ran up, eyes wide with fear and awe. "Ethan, are you okay?" he asked, his voice trembling. Ethan chuckled softly, kneeling to place a hand on Liam's shoulder. "I'm fine. Let's head home." As they walked away, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't over. The laughter from the crowd slowly faded, but the gritty threat from the bikers still hung in the air. Unresolved, the walk home was silent, the sound of their sneakers tapping against the pavement the only noise between Ethan and Liam. Ethan could feel his brother glancing up at him every few seconds, a mix of admiration and worry in his eyes. "Ethan," Liam finally whispered, barely above a breath. "How did you do all that? I mean, they were huge, and there were 3 of them." Ethan smiled softly, ruffling Liam's hair. "It's not about being bigger, Liam. It's about being prepared, staying calm, and knowing when to act." Liam nodded slowly, but his concern didn't fade. "But what if they come back? That guy said it wasn't over." Ethan paused and turned to face his brother. He could see the fear in his eyes. "If they do, we'll handle it," Ethan said firmly, his voice steady, though he couldn't deny the knot of unease tightening in his chest. "Listen to me," Ethan added, his tone softening. "What happened today wasn't just about fighting. It was about standing up for yourself, and for you. But violence isn't the answer. Unless there's no other choice." Liam took a deep breath, absorbing Ethan's words. "Yeah, I get it." Ethan gave him a reassuring smile and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember, it's not about proving how strong you are. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone take that away from you." As they continued walking, the weight of the encounter still lingered. Ethan couldn't shake the sense that it wasn't over, that the bikers would come back. But for now, he focused on getting Liam home safely, his heart still racing with the adrenaline from the confrontation. When they arrived at their house, their mother stood on the porch, arms crossed, looking concerned. "You're late," she said, her voice tinged with worry. Ethan hesitated, his eyes flicking to Liam. His younger brother was quiet, his eyes still wide from the events at the park. Ethan didn't want to alarm their mother too much, but he also knew she deserved to know what had happened. "Something happened at the park," Ethan said carefully, choosing his words. He recounted the story as best as he could, leaving out some of the more intense details. Their mother listened intently, her expression shifting from fear to pride. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but her eyes glistened with emotion. "Ethan," she said, her voice quiet but full of strength, "I'm proud of you for protecting yourself and Liam. But promise me one thing. Don't ever take risks like that unless you have no other choice." "I promise," Ethan replied, meaning it. The bikers' aggression, the crowd's reaction, and the leader's final words, "This ain't over, kid." He couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter wasn't truly finished. But as the moonlight filtered through his window, he reminded himself that fear only had power if he allowed it. In that moment, he felt a quiet sense of purpose. He had learned that courage wasn't just about standing up to a bully. It was about knowing when to act, when to stay calm, and when to walk away. The next few weeks were marked by whispers around town. Ethan wasn't one to boast, but the way he stood up to the bikers had inspired many. Parents spoke about it to their kids, sharing stories of bravery, and soon, the event became something people talked about with admiration. But Ethan's sense of unease never quite faded. He could feel the tension in the air every time he walked through the park, and it wasn't just because of the crowd's whispers. It was something deeper, something unspoken. The bikers hadn't forgotten. They couldn't. One evening, as Ethan and Liam sat at the kitchen table finishing their homework, the power flickered and went out. The house plunged into darkness. "Did you pay the bill?" Liam asked nervously. Ethan was already on his feet, moving instinctively toward the window. He looked outside, squinting into the shadows. Then he heard it, the low, growling sound of motorcycle engines revving nearby. "They're back," Liam whispered, fear clear in his voice. Ethan's heart raced. He didn't have to look out the window again to know who it was. The shadows moving outside confirmed it. He pulled Liam closer to him, trying to calm his brother. "Stay by my side," he instructed, his voice steady despite the tension building inside him. The motorcycles rolled into the driveway, engines roaring. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, his posture strong, trying to make himself seem as unyielding as possible. He wasn't going to let them intimidate him, not again. The burly leader stepped off his bike first, flanked by the other 2 bikers. Their expressions were darker this time, mixed with anger and something else, a need for reassurance, perhaps, or an attempt to regain some form of dominance. "What do you want?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice steady, not backing down. The leader sneered. You embarrassed us in front of your little crowd. We don't forget that. Ethan's mind raced. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about Liam, about protecting the people he loved. He didn't want to fight again, but if that was what it came down to, he would. He stood tall, taking in the situation, assessing every possible outcome. This isn't the way to handle things, Ethan replied. We're not doing this again. The burly man shook his head, grinning darkly. We want a rematch, he growled. You think you're tough? Let's prove it. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. Proving toughness doesn't come from aggression. You might think you're strong, but real strength comes from restraint. If someone threatens us again, maybe then we'll talk. But not like this. For a moment, there was silence. The tension in the air thickened. The two sides locked in a standoff. One of the bikers, the one with the bruised rib from the park, stepped forward, his face twisted in defiance. You really think you can lecture us? You're just a kid, he scoffed. That was when Ethan decided to shift the conversation, aiming to defuse the situation rather than escalate it. Maybe I am just a kid, he said calmly. But you three seem to have a lot to learn about respect. It's not about size or strength. It's about how you treat people. The leader's expression faltered. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. He took a step back, his posture less aggressive. After a long silence, the leader spoke, his voice quieter. Maybe we're not so different. Ethan nodded slowly. Change takes time, he said, his tone still calm. The hardest fights are with yourself. You've got the power to choose. Choose differently. Without another word, the bikers turned and mounted their motorcycles. The engines roared to life, and they rode off, leaving Ethan and Liam standing in the quiet, moonlit night. Liam looked up at his brother, his voice full of awe. You stood your ground. Ethan chuckled softly, ruffling Liam's hair. It's not just about standing your ground. It's about standing for what's right. The days after the park incident were strangely quiet, yet a constant unease clung to Ethan. The community had praised him, sharing stories of bravery and standing up to bullies, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the bikers hadn't forgotten. He stayed alert, especially whenever he was out with Liam. Then one evening, as Ethan and Liam sat finishing their homework at the kitchen table, the power flickered. Not again, Liam groaned, squinting at the darkening room. Ethan froze, sensing something. The engines of motorcycles rumbled in the distance, growing louder. His stomach tightened. They're back, Liam whispered. Ethan didn't respond right away. Instead, he stood, scanning the front yard through the window. The headlights were unmistakable. He turned to Liam, whose eyes were wide with fear. Stay inside. And don't open the door for anyone, Ethan ordered, his voice low but steady. Liam nodded, staying behind the door as Ethan walked out onto the porch. The night air felt heavier now. The sound of revving engines filled the street as 3 motorcycles came into view, slowing as they approached their house. Ethan recognized the leader immediately. Burly, the one from the park. The same anger was evident on his face. The bikers dismounted, and the leader stepped forward, a sneer on his lips. You embarrassed us, kid. You made us look weak. We don't forget that. Ethan's posture was calm, but his heart raced. He wasn't going to let them intimidate him again. What do you want now? Ethan asked, his voice even but strong. The leader stepped closer, his fists clenched. A rematch. You think you're tough? Let's see if you can back it up again. Ethan didn't flinch. I'm not here to fight you, he said, the words deliberate. I'm not doing this again. It's about respect. And you've got a lot to learn. The leader's eyes flickered, then narrowed. He motioned for his men to circle Ethan, but his tone had shifted slightly, less sure of himself. You really think you can lecture us? The biker with the bruised rib sneered. You're just a kid. Ethan stood tall, his stance unshaken. Maybe I am just a kid, he said quietly. But that doesn't mean I don't know what respect is. You want to prove something. Prove it by walking away. He was uncertain for the first time. Then he seemed to deflate, stepping back. We're not so different, kid, he muttered, his voice losing some of its earlier venom. Ethan nodded, though he wasn't fully convinced. You still have a choice. Make it a better one next time. The bikers didn't say anything more. With a final glare, the leader turned and climbed onto his bike. One by one, the others followed, their engines roaring to life, fading into the night. Ethan stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of their bikes grow fainter until they were gone. He exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders. He turned back to the house, where Liam was waiting at the window. "They're gone," Ethan said, walking back inside. Liam looked at him with a mix of awe and worry. "How do you do that? Every time, you just stand your ground." Ethan smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's not just about standing your ground. It's about standing for what's right, and knowing when to walk away." As they headed to their room, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. That whatever came next, he'd have to be ready. But for now, he focused on the relief of the moment, the knowledge that he had made a difference, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. In the days following the biker's departure, life began to return to a semblance of normality. Ethan didn't feel any less alert, but the tension that had clouded the air had lifted, at least for now. The streets felt safer, and people were more at ease, but there was a subtle shift in the way they looked at him. He wasn't just the quiet, reserved teenager anymore. He was the one who had stood up to the bikers and walked away without resorting to violence. The talk of the town, so to speak. One afternoon, as Ethan and Liam sat in the living room, their mom entered with a thoughtful expression on her face. "I've been talking to Mrs. Palmer at the community center," she said, her voice warm. "She wants to know if you'd be interested in running a workshop for kids, teaching them about conflict resolution, self-defense, maybe even some lessons on how to stand up for themselves without fighting." Ethan blinked, taken aback. "A workshop? For me?" He glanced at Liam, who was grinning from ear to ear. "Yeah, you've got something important to teach," their mom said, smiling proudly. "And I think it could make a real difference." Ethan had never thought about it before, but the more he considered it, the more it made sense. His experience had taught him that strength wasn't just about knowing how to fight. It was about knowing when to fight and, just as importantly, when to walk away. Maybe he could help others understand that. The next week, Ethan found himself standing in front of a group of eager kids at the community center, his heart racing. He wasn't sure what to expect. The room was full of young faces, all watching him with a mix of curiosity and expectation. He swallowed his nerves and cleared his throat. "Hey everyone," Ethan said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I'm Ethan, and I'm here to talk to you about something that's important. How to stand up for yourself, how to deal with bullies, and how to handle situations when things get heated." The kids looked at him, hanging on to every word. He couldn't help but think of the lessons he'd learned himself, how to stay calm, how to use your head instead of your fists, how to be ready when the moment called for it. He shared his story with the group, the one about the bikers, and how he'd had to choose between fighting or walking away. He talked about how fear was a part of every challenge, but it didn't have to control you. "Strength is more than what you can do with your fists," he said, pacing slowly in front of the group. "It's about understanding the power you have to choose your actions. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means knowing when to say no, when to walk away. Sometimes, it's the hardest thing to do, but it's also the right thing." As he spoke, he could see some of the kids nodding, their eyes wide with understanding. They weren't just listening, they were absorbing what he was saying. And that felt important, more important than anything else. The session ended with a Q&A. The kids asked questions, some about fighting, others about fear, others about how to handle situations when they felt out of control. Ethan answered every question carefully, making sure to always emphasize the importance of using wisdom, not force, whenever possible. When the workshop was over, Mrs. Palmer came up to him with a proud smile. "That was amazing, Ethan. You really connected with them." They were hanging on to every word. Ethan felt a strange sense of fulfillment. It wasn't the applause he cared about. It was the quiet gratitude he saw in the kids' faces. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something bigger. As he left the community center, Ethan found Liam waiting for him by the car, a big grin on his face. "You were awesome, Ethan. They all looked up to you." Ethan smiled, ruffling Liam's hair. "It's not about being awesome, Lee. It's about helping others find their own strength." As they drove home, Ethan thought about everything that had happened. The bikers, the community center, and all the moments in between. It had been a journey, one that had taught him lessons he would never forget. But now, he felt like he was ready for whatever came next. One thing was certain. Ethan's story wasn't just about standing up to bullies. It was about showing others that strength wasn't about overpowering someone else. It was about lifting them up, about resilience, and about making the world a better place through courage and compassion. As the evening sky darkened, and the car rolled down the familiar streets, Ethan couldn't help but feel like he was finally walking the path he was meant to walk. A path of purpose, of strength, and above all, of knowing the power of standing up for what's right.